All right, good evening. If you would, turn in your Bibles to Genesis chapter 46. We're resuming our journey through Genesis, picking up with Jacob. Those of you that have been paying attention to some of the types, just interesting that during this time of the famine, we're moving from the main story of Joseph and kind of resuming our story, our dialogue with Jacob. And where are we at right now as we're picking up in 46? Last week, we see two amazing things happen. First, we see Joseph reveal himself to his brothers. And we see that his brothers were just so taken back, like they couldn't do anything. And Joseph has to call them near to him, because essentially when he had revealed himself, remember how he revealed himself. He threw all of his entourage, threw him out of his room, and wept so loud that echoed through the halls, even Pharaoh was able to hear Joseph weeping. So the brothers kind of went into panic level expert. They kind of jumped back a little bit as Pharaoh's drawing them near, or Joseph, is trying to call them closer to him. And he's kind of revealing, this is who I am. I am your brother. I'm Joseph. I'm the one that you sold. I'm the one you did all this bad stuff to, as something as an identifier. But then he told the brothers to go back and do something very hard. The brothers had to go back and reveal to Jacob, to Israel, that Joseph was still alive. They'd had quite a bit of explaining to do. And we left off with Jacob saying, "It is enough. My son is alive." And it gave us really kind of a strong spiritual point for us, doesn't it? When we're trying to evangelize, we're trying to show someone how amazing the word is, we're trying to get someone to go to church or whatever it is. What do we kind of use? This isn't the right word for it, but what do we use as something of a lure? I'm a fisherman, so those are just kind of the words that I use. Like, what do we use? Something shiny? We use something dark? Like, you got to know how to do those things. We're called fishers of men. And if you notice, especially if you're a fisherman, sometimes what works one day isn't going to work the next day. So what is it that you use as a lure to try and get someone to church? Oh, we have the best program. We've got the biggest TV in the valley. We've got the best, worship going on. We have Oreos in the back. We've got the coolest pastor. Whatever it is, like, what is it that we're doing? But we miss the mark often when it's Jesus. Just like it was for Joseph. Jacob was not budging for nothing. Even to send his last son of Rachel to Egypt, he could have gone with them if he was really that worried about it. When my kids get older and I send them off to college, I'm going with them. Mostly for my sport, not necessarily for their sake. But he wouldn't budge. But he's got that interesting phrase as we finished up chapter 45 last week. My son is alive. The son is alive. It is enough. Let's go. That's really the game changer for us as believers. That concept, that phrase that we really only use once a year, and it's very unfortunate, but he is risen. It's the same thing. My son is alive. It is enough. Let's go. He is risen. That's the game changer. Everybody else, they're still dead. But for Jesus to make those crazy claims of who he was, of his deity, and how his name is really just riddled in the text all through Genesis through Malachi. And he steps on scene, and as we'll see this week and next week on our Sunday mornings, we're moving through the Gospel of Mark. We're coming to that place of Jesus' trials and the crucifixion. They ask Jesus, "Are you the Messiah? Are you the one that we're waiting for?" And Jesus says, "I am. And soon you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of the Father coming in the clouds." So they know exactly what Jesus says. And the priest, Caiaphas, tears his robes. He said, "Blasphemy," because they understood what Jesus was saying. They understood that he was saying that he is God. That's crazy. How many people we have throughout the course of history say that? Hundreds of them. How many people have died, or how many people have gone to the cross? Even more than that. How many people have risen? Because Jesus has risen and then the Son is alive, it is enough. bringing our focus back on Jesus, and we'll probably end up going through that whole thing again on Sunday. So chapter 46, now we pick up with Jacob. It is enough. He's rounding up all the stuff, and he's getting ready to make his trek into Egypt. So we get to resume our dealings with Jacob. So chapter 46. So Israel, you have to remember that Jacob's name was changed to Israel. So Israel took his journey with all he had and came to Beersheba and offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. Then God spoke to Israel in the visions of the night and said, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, here I am. So he said, I am God, the God of your father. Do not fear to go down to Egypt. So Jacob hears it. Jacob rounds up all his stuff, and he starts moving from Hebron to Beersheba. You remember we were introduced to Beersheba in Genesis chapter 21. We had another visitation of Beersheba in chapter 26. So chapter 21 is where Abraham, has the altar, but he plants the tamarisk tree at Beersheba, the well of seven, or the well of the oath. And then we see Isaac there as well. Just another powerful kind of concept to the altars, to the pillars that we build in our lives. When we do it for ourselves, kind of like we have our prayer journal, or we have our provision journal. And this is where God is always kind of taking care of me. Write that stuff down. Why? Because we're very forgetful creatures. That's one great attribute of man. We forget things, especially when things get hard. So we set up kind of those pillars, those reminders, those remembrances, those things in our lives, kind of like if anybody's done any roofing. Any good roofer, they're either going to tether themselves to something, or they're going to put like a 2x4 or something. So if they do slide a little bit, they're going to hit something solid, and they're not going to go sliding off the roof. It's like that in our life. So we don't forget, so we don't backslide. If we do backslide, we're going so far before we end up stopping on something we've created for ourselves, something that God has done in our lives. But what's interesting here is that's kind of that legacy left by Abraham, by Isaac, as a witness, as a testimony to somebody else. Who? Jacob. Jacob stops at Beersheba, that southern area, before he goes in to Egypt. This is important. So why does he do that? First, I would have imagined he's praising God. His son is alive. 22 years. Joseph and Jacob have been separated for 22 years. So now he finds out he's alive. He's getting ready to go to Egypt. He's at the altar. He's making the sacrifice. He's praising God. Lord, thank you, my son is alive. But what else is he doing? He's afraid. He's at Beersheba. He's literally at a crossroad getting ready to go into Egypt. Abraham was not supposed to go into Egypt, but he tried it. Well, he did it. And what happened? He got rebuked by Pharaoh. We remember that story. As he had that conversation with his darling wife. Oh, honey, if anybody asks you who you are because of your amazing beauty, you tell them you're my sister. We've seen that one played all through the family bloodline. And he got rebuked by Pharaoh. Got rebuked by Ahimelech. Isaac tried going into Egypt. And God stopped him and told him, don't you go down into Egypt. So it would make sense that he would stop. It would be a fearful thing. Hey, Dad, guess what? Joseph's in Egypt. Not really sure how he got down there, but he's there. He's second in command. He wants you to come look. He sent all these carts. What were the carts for? Load up the kids. Load up those that couldn't make the journey. Load up all the stuff. And we're going to take you down to Egypt. Oh, that's a bad place. Abraham, Father Abraham, he got a lot of trouble in Egypt. Isaac couldn't go down to Egypt. If Abraham wasn't called into Egypt, if Isaac wasn't called into Egypt, why would I be called into Egypt? If you are uncertain of the will of God to go a certain direction, it is best to hesitate. But as soon as you find out what the will of God is for you to go, there should be nothing stopping you, period. Because the best place for peace and joy, you're going to find it being obedient to the will of God. So he's at this crossroad. Why else is he nervous? Jacob, no doubt, was taught the promise of, I believe it's Genesis chapter 15. What was that promise? You and your generations will be slaves in a foreign land for 400 years. He's getting ready to go to a foreign land with all of his stuff. And we're going to see God addressing that. So it would seem that Jacob is seeking counsel before he is moving. And we kind of see the concept that there is, no doubt, a little bit of fear in his heart. This is absolutely I've kind of been here, not going to Egypt, whatever else, when we're getting ready to come to Baker. But even more so when I was getting ready to leave Gooding to go serve in Homedale for a little while. Homedale, kind of Ontario, Baker City, it was kind of a drag, all that driving, but it was manageable for us. But when I found out that God wanted us to go from Gooding, from Twin Falls area to Homedale, the only thing I could do was quit my job. And I really liked my job. It's a great company. 2 days after we had this word given to us that it was time to go, we got back from that same conference in Tucson, so that's not good. It was on my heart. I told Megan, it's like, hey, we're moving to Homedale. She thought I was lying. 2 days later, I walked into my boss. I told him, you know what, I quit. I'll give you a week. I'll give you 2 weeks. I'll give you 6 months. I don't know how fast I'm leaving, but I am leaving. Sure enough, 2 weeks later, I was gone. And I just put it in the hands of God, and he took care of every last step, as he always had. We see Israel's name changed back to Jacob. When we see a name change in the Bible, it typically has that connotation. There's a character change with that individual. So he's been called Israel. But now, if you notice this, so Israel took his journey, how he's identifying himself. Then God spoke to him, Jacob, there's that fear in his heart. Jacob here has an opportunity, which we'll get to. Jacob here has an opportunity to try, a very bold word, but he's going to try and outthink God. Oh, what if? We're going to ask God, but he does have opportunity to what if and try and change things. But just like we saw in chapter 31, how God is getting ready to move us, how God is getting ready to move Jacob, the desires in his heart. His circumstances are changed. He has confirmation through God's word and confirmation through others. So he still meets kind of those four criteria, goes to Beersheba and calls out to the Lord, and we see this is the kind of the last of the 7 appearances for Jacob, and Jacob responds, here I am. It's just kind of interesting that in all essentially 22 years, granted it's just a couple of chapters, but 22 years, we haven't seen Jacob calling the Lord since before chapter 37. So this really must have been kind of just a breath of fresh air for Jacob. So he said, I am God, the God of your father. Do not fear to go down to Egypt. And then we see 3 key promises. First, for I will make of you a great nation there. That is the purpose. The purpose of bringing Israel and his 12 sons and their sons' sons. The purpose of bringing Jacob, Israel, into Egypt is to make him a great nation there. And we'll come back to that point. Second, I will go down with you to Egypt. That would have been the most comforting thing, isn't it? When you're going into something hard, you're going into something dangerous, you're going into something uncertain, none of those things should cause anxiety in us, knowing that the Lord is going with us. And I will surely bring you up again, and Joseph will put his hand on your eyes. So he's telling him, you're not going to stay in Egypt. I'm going to bring you back to the land. And that's kind of an important thing. Remember when Jacob had swindled his brother, swindled his father, and he was sent north up into the region of Aram, and he has that dream. Remember the stairway to heaven, the angels were ascending and descending up into heaven, showing, God's constant work with man. And he gets that promise. He's like, I'm going to bring you back to this land. And what does Jacob tell him? If you're going to bring me back to this land, you're going to be my God. And the Lord, again, to Jacob, I will bring you back. And we're going to see kind of a dual fulfillment of that one. At Jacob's death, Joseph and the sons bring him back into Canaan to bury him. And then after the Exodus, as we get into the book of Joshua, we see the nation of Israel going back. And he promises a peaceful death, that Joseph would put his hands on your eyes. The one member of the family would have the honor of, when someone dies. It's not like Hollywood, where they kind of do that awesome little death scene and their eyes are closed. Their eyes are open, so the family member would honor one of the family members to close their eyes. So he's promising Jacob, you're going to die in peace. Then Jacob arose from Beersheba, and the sons of Israel carried their father Jacob, their little ones, and their wives in the carts which Pharaoh had sent to carry him. He's got the Lord's will. He's got these three amazing promises. I'm going to go with you, I'm going to multiply you, and I'm going to bring you back. So what does Jacob do at that point? Okay. I love seeing a fast response of obedience to the Lord's will. I love seeing that in my life. And the reason I love seeing it in my life so much, and the reason I love seeing it, I like seeing it in other believers. But I don't know you. I know me. I know how disobedient I've been in my life. We know how disobedient and just weird and treacherous and sneaky that Jacob has been, that Israel has been. So now we see that he has his confirmation from the Lord. He's not holding back. He's gathered up his stuff, and he is heading to Egypt. So they took their livestock and their goods, which they had acquired in the land of Canaan, and went to Egypt. Jacob and all his descendants with him, his sons, his sons' sons, his daughters, and his sons' daughters, and all his descendants he brought with him to Egypt. I love that verse. Such a simple verse, but I really like it. Pharaoh told Joseph to tell his family to don't even bother just bringing your stuff. We got cooler stuff in Egypt. Right? We remember that one. It's like, you don't need to bring anything. You don't need to bring your couch. You don't need to bring your Samsung big screen. You don't need to bring any of that stuff. Egypt's cooler. You don't need all of that. Well, there's kind of a problem. It's still my stuff. It's still my house. When there's a mass evacuation, and we've seen kind of the emergency broadcasts that have taken place, especially in this area. I remember a few years ago when the fires were getting kind of close. What's the recommendation for a fire? Have you guys actually read into that law? You are to leave and not take anything with you. Anything left behind is forfeit if they need it to help fight fires or do whatever they're doing. Now that makes sense, right? That makes sense. Travel light, travel fast. But it's my boat. It's my camper. It's my truck. Like the reasonable thing will probably take Megan's Acadia. My truck is cooler. Truck is way more useful. I don't want to leave my stuff. What have we seen historically? We see it in movies. We see it all over the place. What do a lot of people do? Now, I'm not leaving. I'll be fine. Fires aren't even going to make it this far. Floods aren't going to make it this far. The winds aren't going to make it this far. The whatever it is not going to make it. So we want to stay there for the sole purpose of guarding our stuff. That is kind of what we were talking about a few verses ago. All the J's in that family. Jacob very easily, because we've seen him do it. What did God do when he was supposed to go and meet Esau? You're going to be fine. Go home. Yes, Lord. After he fights with him all night long. Still, Jacob divides his caravan. Remember that one. First, he's going to divide it in half. Hey, if they attack the front half, which he wasn't in, where was Rachel? Not in the first half. They were in the back. Someone attacks the first half. Hey, I tried. We can go back. But that wasn't good enough. Breaking it in half. So then he broke it down into fourths. 4 different parts with a little bit of isolation. We'll attack the first one and the second one, maybe even the third one. Us in the back, we can still get away. Then he didn't go to Hebron. He didn't go all the way to Bethel, near Beersheba. Where did he go? He went to Shechem, in the northern territory. Why did he do that? Esau lived in the south, not too far from Hebron. So what could Jacob have done? Who's he mad at? Reuben, Simeon, you're the idiot that got locked up last. Levi, you guys stay here and guard the property. Have the land, We'll send you grain. You'll be fine. Make sure nobody else occupies my place. He doesn't do that. We see in full obedience, full submission to God's will, he rounds up all of his people and takes them all to Egypt. Now these were the names of the children of Israel. Jacob and his sons who went to Egypt. Reuben was Jacob's firstborn. The sons of Reuben were Hanak, Palu, Hezron, and Carmi. Again, if any of you are looking for names for newborns, we got a whole bunch of them coming up. The sons of Simeon were Jemuel, Jamin, Ohad, Jachin, Zohar, and Shual, the son of a Canaanite woman. The sons of Levi were Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. The sons of Judah were Er, Ornan, Shelah, Perez, and Zerah. But Er and Onan died in the land of Canaan, which we remember that story, I believe in chapter 38. The sons of Issachar were Tola, Puvah, Job, and Shimron. The sons of Zebulun were Sered, Elon, Jaleel. These were the sons of Leah, whom she bore to Jacob in Padan Aram, with his daughter Dinah. All the persons, his sons and his daughters, were 33. The sons of Gad were Ziphion, Hagi, Shuni, Esbon, Eri, Erodai, and Ereli. That one's actually kind of pretty. The sons of Asher were Jimnah, Ishua, Isui, Beriah, and Sarah, their sister. And the sons of Beriah were Heber and Malchiel. These were the sons of Zilpah, whom Laban gave to Leah, his daughter. And these she bore to Jacob, 16 persons. The sons of Rachel, Jacob's wife, were Joseph and Benjamin. And to Joseph, in the land of Egypt, were born Manasseh and Ephraim, whom Asenath, the daughter of Potipharah, priest of On, bore to him. The sons of Benjamin were Bela, Besher, Ashbel, Gera, Naaman, Ehi, Rosh, Muppim, Huppim, and Ard. He was more original. These were the sons of Rachel who were born to Jacob, 14 persons in all. The sons of Dan were Hushim. The sons of Naphtali were Jaziel, Guni, Jezer, Shilem. These were the sons of Bilhah, whom Laban gave to Rachel, his daughter. And she bore these to Jacob, 7 persons in all. All the persons who came with Jacob to Egypt, who came from his body, besides Jacob's sons' wives, were 66 persons in all. And the sons of Joseph, who were born to him in Egypt, were 2 persons. All the persons of the house of Jacob who went to Egypt were 70. So we have the genealogies. Love the genealogies. Why are they kept? We see these repeated kind of in the book of Luke. Matthew, we get to see this kind of this line, this trace leading to Jesus. I think the other thing I really like about genealogies is nobody likes genealogies. I don't want to be rude, but I really don't care about your genealogy. Unless there's something really cool in there. I had a buddy whose brother's sister's friend's husband's cousin or whatever it was had a lineage linked to Jesse James. I was like, that's kind of cool. Nobody really cares about a lineage unless it's your lineage, unless your name is in there. But what's really neat is these names are written in a book. These names, a lot of them we're not going to read again. Kind of makes them what we would deem it's a little person. They're not going to do anything special. They're not going to attain anything special. But I'll tell you what, these people, if they could hear you reading their names, they'd be very excited. To see our names in the book of life would make us very excited. But what's neat is even though some of these names we won't see again, God saw fit to have it preserved. We're still reading the same names over 3,000 years later. Just such an amazing thing. Then he sent Judah before him to Joseph to point out before him the way to Goshen. And they came to the land of Goshen. So we see Judah being sent forward. We see Judah, though the fourth born, we still see him kind of stepping up into this place of leadership or responsibility. And he's being sent forward to a place that has been prepared. For those of you who like running down types. So Joseph made ready his chariot and went up to Goshen to meet his father Israel. And he presented himself to him, fell on his neck, and wept on his neck a good while. So we still see Joseph, though second command of all of essentially the known world. We see Joseph presenting himself to his father, falling on his neck, weeping. So he shows respect to his father. He honors his father. He hasn't seen his dad in 22 years. 22 years. He didn't know if his father was alive. In 22 years, Jacob was certain that Joseph was dead. And Israel said to Joseph, "Now let me die, since I have seen your face, because you are alive." He is just as giddy as can be. He has finally seen Jacob. His life is back to a full measure, and he's good. So then Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household, "I will go up and tell Pharaoh and say to him, 'My brothers and those of my father's house who are in the land of Canaan have come to me. And the men are shepherds, for their occupation has been to feed livestock, and they have brought their flocks, their herds, and all that they have. So it will be when Pharaoh calls you and says, "What is your occupation?" that you shall say, "Your servant's occupation has been with livestock from our youth, even till now, both we and also our fathers, that you may dwell in the land of Goshen, for every shepherd is an abomination to the Egyptians." So we see Joseph in two kind of interesting roles. We see Joseph as a mediator. That's what Israel really needs right now. They need a mediator. Not only do they have a mediator in Joseph, but they also have an instructor. They also have a teacher in Joseph. Joseph is letting his family know exactly what's going to happen. I'm going to take you before Pharaoh. This is exactly what you're going to say. He's going to ask, "What's your occupation?" That makes sense. When we come into a new group, we want people to know what we're capable of. People want to know what you're capable of. Just like when you come into the church. Well, what's your spiritual gift? I'm great with kids. Sweet. Children's ministry. I'm handy with a broom. Awesome. Or handy with a lawnmower or a weed whacker. I guess those two things don't really matter because all our grass has been dead since I got here. So he's telling him, "You're going to tell Pharaoh, I'm going to tell Pharaoh you need to go up into Goshen," kind of that real lush area for flocks. And you're going to tell him that you are shepherds. And you're absolutely going to go to Goshen. That's where they send shepherds. Shepherds in Egypt were despised. And we discussed that a few weeks ago, talking about there's two things. Either A, they just saw shepherds as being dirty, filthy, unclean. So they kept them away from them. B, Egyptian, for lack of a better word, shepherds weren't the only ones in the area. Lots of passing flocks from other areas, and shepherds, nomads, were known to be dodgy. They were thieves, kleptos, or whatever it is. Or C, it's likely they were coming out of the Hyksos dynasty. Shepherd kings that kept essentially Egypt in bondage. They kept them in a bad place. So when they were finally changing dynasties, I think it was the 12th dynasty, if I'm not mistaken, the Hyksos dynasty. So when they were changing dynasties, essentially what Egypt was trying to do is just completely just blot all that out. Can't trust shepherds. Shepherds are unclean. They're despised. We saw that a few chapters ago when Joseph was eating with his brothers. Brothers went one place. Joseph went one place. The rest of the Egyptians did not sit down and eat with Joseph, because Joseph still was a foreigner. The Egyptians believed themselves descendants from the gods. The pharaohs were worshipped or heralded as essentially like a reincarnate of Ra. So Joseph's letting them know, you're despised here. No matter how you look at it, whichever A, B, or C you want to go with, shepherds were despised. You can't really be here, so you're going to end up in Goshen. Then Joseph, chapter 47, verse 1, went and told Pharaoh and said, "My father and my brothers, their flocks, their herds, and all that they possess have come from the land of Canaan, and indeed they are in the land of Goshen." And he took 5 men from among his brothers and presented them to Pharaoh. Megan and I had quite the back and forth with this one last night. Why 5? Well, they probably left the rest of them to manage things in Goshen. Some are managing in Goshen, and 5 are going to meet the Pharaoh. Then the next question came up, which doesn't matter. It really does not. Well, which 5 was it? Probably not Reuben. Man, that guy messed up something fierce. Simeon, maybe. He's already used to Pharaoh. Maybe Levi. Don't really know. But we do know that these 5 are probably, so I shouldn't say we do know, we probably can assume that they were better herdsmen for what we're about to get into. They're better herdsmen than the rest of their brothers. So it only took 5. And Pharaoh said to his brothers, "What is your occupation?" And they said to Pharaoh, "Your servants are shepherds, both we and also our fathers." And they said to Pharaoh, we have come to dwell in the land because your servants have no pasture for their flocks, for the famine is severe in the land of Canaan. Now therefore, please let your servants dwell in the land of Goshen. Then Pharaoh spoke to Joseph, saying, your father and your brothers have come to you. The land of Egypt is before you. Have your father and your brothers dwell in the best of the land. Let them dwell in the land of Goshen. And if you know any competent men among them, then make them chief herdsmen over my livestock. So that's probably why he pulled those brothers. They're going to be taking care of essentially the royal flocks. Then Joseph brought in his father Jacob and set him before Pharaoh, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh. That's just interesting. In Hebrews chapter 7, verse 7, we see that the greater blesses the lesser. Kind of an interesting concept. So you have Jacob stepping before Pharaoh, who would have been to the Egyptians a reincarnate of Ra. But now you see Jacob, some dirty old 130-year-old dude, beat up from traveling all the way to Egypt, blessing Pharaoh. Kind of like we saw the king of Salem and his interaction with Abraham after the battle of the kings. So we see him blessing Pharaoh. I just really like that picture. Jacob the believer blessing Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, that type of the world. So we're trying to figure out really what we're doing as believers. If you're kind of lost, you're not really sure what to do, here's step one. Be a blessing. We're supposed to be a blessing to the world, not mix with the world, not keep our hands on a solid grip on something in the world, not to choose to dwell, permanently put roots in the world, but still be a blessing, still be a light, still be a gift. So we have Jacob blessing Pharaoh, and Pharaoh said to Jacob, how old are you? I love that passage because I'm not real good with ancient syntax. I'm not even good with current syntax, how a sentence is structured. I can guess at grammar all day long, but it's exactly that, it's a guess. How I see this verse, Pharaoh allows the blessing. That's what's even more impressive. Pharaoh allows the blessing. Probably, it's one of two things. As old as Jacob is, or he recognizes just the Spirit of God upon Jacob, because he certainly recognizes it. As we saw a few chapters ago, he certainly recognizes the Spirit of God in Joseph. But he asks him, how old are you? I just love those passages. It reminds me when I was a kid. It was the funniest thing ever. My grandpa didn't think it was funny. My youngest brother, probably around 5 or 6 at the time, my grandpa was finishing his morning routine. He lived with us for a while. And he comes out of the bathroom, and my brother stops him, in his tracks. He's like, Grandpa, did you brush your tooth? I was like, dude. It's a death wish statement. So Pharaoh's asking him, how old are you? It's an interesting thing. It's the way I do picture it, and it could be out of context. And again, this is just me, and this is my opinion. But he's asking him for his testimony. When we see age, we assume wisdom. We assume experience. So I think that's kind of what the Pharaoh is getting at. And Jacob said to Pharaoh, the days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years. I love that. The days of my pilgrimage. Even Jacob and all his weirdness, he still understood. He's going to identify his fathers in the same light. But he even recognized that where he is right now, it's not his permanent home. So the days of my pilgrimage, right now, he's 130 years old. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life. Man, that's kind of heavy. Jacob is probably one of the most blessed men in the Bible. Very taken care of in the sovereignty and the providence and the mercy and the grace of God. And he says, few have been my years. 130 years. We call that few. My mother broke my heart today. She reminded me my birthday's coming up in a few weeks. And it's pride, and I get it, and it is what it is. You can rebuke me later. She's like, oh, your birthday's in a couple weeks. You're almost to 40. It's like, I don't feel 40. Then naturally, in my sin nature, I snap back. Well, if I'm 40, what's that make you? So that's the cycle we were in. 130 years, that's pretty good. He lives another 17 years. He dies at 147. Say few and evil. That's what happens when you do not, as we discussed a few chapters ago, that's what happens when you do not recognize a providential God. And it's also, number two, what happens when you do not count your blessings. 130 years with a full family that has survived this famine, taken care of at the right hand of Pharaoh. And the evil, few have been my years, wrong. And evil, how much of that evil did he heap upon himself? You don't have a providential God, and you're not counting your blessings, it is going to skew the vision of your life. And they have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their pilgrimage, which makes sense. Terah was 205, Abraham was 185, and Isaac was 175 when they died. So even though he lived to be 17 years from now, it's 147, he still didn't live as long as his fathers did. And Joseph situated his father and his brothers and gave them possession in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramses, as Pharaoh had commanded. You have to remember the name Goshen kind of wasn't around so much anymore when Moses wrote this book over 400 years later. What I really like about that last passage, about verse 11, Joseph situated them. Joseph was mediator. Joseph was teacher. What is it that Jacob had to do to attain going to this land? Just walk. Just move forward in obedience. Whoa, what am I going to do? How am I going to get there? How am I going to take care of these things? People were sent before him. It was all situated for Israel. Then Joseph provided his father, his brothers, and all his household with bread, according to the number of their families. They were taken care of by the bread provided by Joseph. For those of you who like looking at types, that's a good one. Now there was no bread in all the land, for the famine was very severe, so that the land of so the land of Egypt, the land of Canaan, languished because of the famine. We're in about year 2, coming into year 3 of the famine. You remember when Joseph revealed himself to his brothers, you meant evil for me, but I was sent to preserve life. This is only year 2 of the famine. There's still 5 years left, so the famine got so bad. And even with all of the stockpiling and things that he's doing, it's not just Egypt coming to Joseph for grain. It's not just Egypt coming to Joseph for bread, but the whole world is doing it. Even where they were up in Hebron, Jacob was sending his sons into Egypt to buy grain. And Joseph gathered up all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan for the grain which they bought. And Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house. Just kind of shows the continued loyalty and integrity of Joseph taking it into Pharaoh's house, taking it into Pharaoh's storages, not in his own pockets. So when the money failed in the land, meaning everybody's getting ready to go broke, as we finish this section through verse 26, I just really want to point out, when we've been studying prophecy, there's really 2 ways to look at prophecy. Now, we're not looking at prophecy right here, so please don't get confused. But there's 2 different mentalities about it. There's the Greek and the Jewish thought on prophecy. The Greek aspect of prophecy is see the prophecy, see the fulfillment. That's it. They see it as linear, A to B. But it's not how the Jews really saw it. So they saw prophecy, and they see the fulfillment of prophecy, but they see it as something of a pattern, something of a wheel. As we've been trying to point out, as we've been moving especially our way through the book of Genesis. So it's kind of important to really see what we're going to cover in these few verses and kind of just look at where we are now. It'll give you a good idea of kind of what we're stepping into. So when the money failed in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, "Give us bread, for why should we die in your presence? For the money has failed." Then Joseph said, "Give me your livestock, and I will give you bread for your livestock if the money is gone." So we still see Joseph dealing with the famine. The money is gone. Well, what do we do if we don't have any money? Okay, livestock is next. So they brought their livestock to Joseph, and Joseph gave them bread in exchange for the horses, the flocks, the cattle, the herds, and for the donkeys. Thus he fed them with bread in exchange for all their livestock that year. When that year had ended, They came to him the next year and said to him, "We will not hide from my lord that our money is gone. My lord also has our herds of livestock. There is nothing left in the sight of my lord but our bodies and our lands. Why should we die before your eyes, both we and our land? Buy us and our land for bread, and we and our land will be servants of Pharaoh. Give us seed that we may live and not die, that the land may not be desolate." So kind of like, washing dishes if you don't have the money to pay for your food. That's essentially what they're stepping into. And it also points out a couple of other things. When our lives are saved, how the more eager we are to serve and to trust. Then Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh. For every man of the Egyptians sold his field, because the famine was severe upon them, so the land became Pharaoh's. During times of national crisis, it's really not a huge shocker, since we've seen it historically a number of times, that the ruling authorities become quite prosperous. Only the land of the priests he did not buy, for the priests had rations allotted to them by Pharaoh, and they ate their rations which Pharaoh gave them. Therefore they did not sell their lands. That's just neat, isn't it? The thing that we're going to see in the Levitical priesthood and in the priests, their portion, their inheritance was God. They weren't really given a land. And here, for Egypt, the priests for Egypt, for Pharaoh, they didn't have to give up their lands. They were just still taken care of by Pharaoh. I thought that was interesting. Then Joseph said to the people, "Indeed, I have bought you and your land this day for Pharaoh. Look, here is seed for you, and you shall sow the land. And it came to pass in the harvest that you shall give 1/5 to Pharaoh. 4/5 shall be your own, as seed for the field and for your own food, and those of your households, and as food for your little ones." So they said, "You have saved our lives. Let us find favor in the sight of our Lord, and we will be Pharaoh's servants." And Joseph made it a law over the land of Egypt to this day, that Pharaoh should have 1/5, except for the land of the priests only, which did not become Pharaoh's. So Israel dwelt in the land of Egypt, in the country of Goshen. And they had possessions there, and grew and multiplied exceedingly. That grew and multiplied exceedingly. There's something about that passage. Christians, believers, it's kind of a drag, but man, we're whiners sometimes, aren't we? And I'm just as guilty. It's hard for me to have a good witness. It's hard for me to have a good testimony working in this dump. I got this guy who's going to say whatever he wants to say. I got this guy that's going to do whatever he wants to do. Nobody wants to listen to truth. All day long they talk about, rated R movies and sports and whatever. Like, I just want to talk about what I would do to have another believer in here. I can't grow here. You guys are stunting my growth. Like, we have these kind of complaints, especially in the workforce or in a city or in a community or in a certain environment. I can't grow here. We forget about God. If God can grow them in Egypt. We're supposed to come back to that point. But if God can grow them in Egypt, God can grow you in your environment. Why was God bringing them into Egypt as something of an incubator? 2 reasons. First, you remember all the way back, or you can go back and read it in Genesis chapter 15, where he's telling them, you're going to be taken into a land and be slaves for 400 years. Why? A lot of people teach, it's very unfortunate, it's like, well, there were only 70 people, immediate families. This doesn't talk about, any of the house slaves or anything else had with them. 70 people. You can't take a promised land with 70 people. That's just dumb, because you can. We've seen God do some really cool stuff with some crazy numbers. So if that's not the reason, what is it? Remember Genesis chapter 15. Until the iniquity of the Amalekites is complete. Is it Amalekites? Amorites? It's an ites. There's something about ites. Till their iniquity is complete, God is still working with the inhabitants of the land that came. So he brings them down into Egypt to grow them, to multiply them, to have them kind of something like in an incubator. Why? They were shepherds. They would have been isolated culturally, socially, physically. Couldn't intermarry and couldn't mingle socially. So they're going to, even though they're in this foreign land with all these foreign gods and weird cultures, they're still going to be isolated in their own thing and allowed to grow. And Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years, so the length of Jacob's life was 147 years. When the time drew near that Israel must die, he called his son Joseph and said to him, "Now if I have found favor in your sight, please put your hand under my thigh and deal kindly and truly with me." So we see this oath, and we've seen this oath before. Remember when they were trying to find a wife for Isaac? He said of the unnamed servant, "Put your hand under my thigh." Why under your thigh? It's the strongest muscle. Kind of the strong, like there's the concept of a strong promise. Do not go get a wife for my son from Canaan. Go all the way back home and go find her. So he swore. So he's doing the same thing here with Joseph, saying, "Please do not bury me in Egypt." Such an incredible thing out of Jacob. Do not bury me here. Why is Jacob so adamant about that promise? It could be that they're afraid. Could be that he's afraid that they won't want to go back. When we come to a place of comfort, or maybe not even very comfortable, but we're in a place where we know we're taken care of. There's just something about a guarantee, isn't there? We look for guarantees on boxes. Why won't we buy that drill? Why would we buy a Ford, guaranteed tough or whatever? Well, we have that guarantee. If this doesn't work right, hey, it's your money back. If this breaks within 5 years or a lifetime, it's your money back. We really look for those things on the box. We look for those things on the label. We have a guarantee. We get into a place of comfort. We get into a place of being able to plan ahead. I am set for life if I just stay here. How hard is it getting a job for like Fish and Game or the post office or I don't know, something? You got to wait for somebody to die to go into that job. Why? Because that job is awesome. That's why they stay there for 50 years. We get into a place of comfort and we don't want to leave that comfort. It's like, well, when have we seen that? How about after the 70 years of captivity? The book of Esther was written after the release. There were Jews who decided not to go home. After the 70-year captivity was over and the decree of Cyrus went out that we see in Nehemiah and Ezra, there was a lot of Jews that didn't go home. Well, my kids are going to school here. My husband's got a great job here. Or some, like Daniel, the prophet, just couldn't leave. And we see that bringing Daniel to a place of weeping. So it could be that. Could be faith. Could be a reminder. This isn't our home. This isn't where we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be in the land of Canaan. So he's making that quite the thing to Joseph. Because you have his brothers, we've always seen not very trustworthy. And Joseph, how stacked is Joseph right now? He is set. He has no reason to go home. So we see him making that promise. But let me lie with my fathers. You shall carry me out of Egypt and bury me in their burial place. And he said, I will do as you have said. Then he said, swear to me. And he swore to him. So Israel bowed himself on the head of the bed. As we've been dealing with the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Joseph, one of the big things we've been kind of dealing with is legacy. And we're starting to see this legacy come to a close in Jacob, the last of the patriarchs. Man, what a legacy, right? Like, look at the neat stuff, the amazing and the hard, the difficult things that we saw in Abraham. Called out of Mesopotamia, and it's just this fertile crescent, just this land that's just lush. And I've been there. I've been into Babylon. I've been south of Babylon. And the river, now granted, it's a horrible desert, and it stinks. But you get on the river, and there's so much green. We were bombing through the desert for weeks, and it's the same ugly, stinky desert. I love the desert, but I hate the desert. It's a weird thing. Don't judge me. But we stopped, and like, all right, guys, get out. We're going to start digging again. Because every night we would dig fighting holes. And that was horrible. It's probably why I hate the desert so much. But we get out, they let down the back of the Amtrak. It was so green. I'd never seen anything so green. It was so pretty. He was called out of that. But God didn't say where. You notice that in the text? In chapter 12 of the book of Genesis, it says, hey, you're going to leave a land that I'm going to show you. Like, Lord, where is it going to be? because the Sinai Desert is just a little ways west. Like, it could have been there. But he rucks up and he goes. And eventually he makes his way down into Bethel. Finally, he has a son. Finally, Isaac is born. And what does God tell him? You're going to go to Mount Moriah and you're going to offer me your son, the son you love. So what does he do? He takes Isaac and he goes. Well, it's such a life of obedience. Then we see Isaac waiting for his bride, waiting for Rebekah to be brought back. Then we see Jacob. What a dirtbag. We're a lot of Jacobs. Sometimes we're Abraham, sometimes we're Isaac, sometimes we're the better parts of David. Sometimes we're the better parts of the disciples, sometimes we're Peter on those bad times. But Jacob's kind of a dirtball. Cheated his brother, cheated his father, never got to have the reunion. He got up to the region of Aram, and him and Laban, his uncle, went back and forth in rounds. Then he was supposed to go south, and his name was changed to Israel. He wrestled with God and prevailed. Then he kind of slunk his way across the river, and he finally met Esau. And remember what he did with Esau? He sent all this lavish gifts to Esau. And, Kyle taught that section. So he finally makes his way to Esau, and it says he bows to him 7 times. But in the text and culturally, what did that 7 times look like? He would bow. He'd walk a little bit. He'd bow again. He'd get up, he'd walk a little bit more, and he'd bow again. It's the most ridiculous thing you could really possibly fathom. Then he told Esau, I was like, yep, I'll see you at home, little brother, or big brother, or whatever, twinsy. But what does he do? He sends Esau south. He goes north to Shechem with a woe is me attitude. Especially after his brothers, Simeon and Levi, second and third born, slaughter all the men through treachery, through deceit in Shechem. Then he's like, oh, now they're going to seek to take my life. And then they ruck up, then cast away their foreign gods and start making their way to Hebron. It's not the legacy we want to leave, but for some of us, that's the legacy that we kind of have. Or it's the testimony. Or that's the lifestyle we have. Let's talk about legacy. What amazing legacy did Jacob leave for his sons? The 2 things, that one of faith, having Joseph swear to him to not let him be buried in Egypt. But 2, such an incredible legacy. God can use anybody. We feel that we have tarnished our legacy, or we have tarnished our testimony so much that we've come to a place of God can't use me. And we let it stop us from going any further in our walk with Christ. You don't have to. Look at how God used Jacob. Israel, the father of the nation, God still used Jacob. If that's not good enough for you, you keep reading. God's used a donkey. God's used a fish. Surely you're better off than those 2 creatures. Powerful legacy. If you're not entirely sure what kind of legacy you're leaving, at least leave one of, Lord, I am here. Please, God, use me. Let's pray together. Lord, thank you so much for your word. We're very thankful, God, to be a fellowship that is hungry for your word. Lord, such a powerful story. We see you give insight, a promise to Abraham all the way back in chapter 15. And we've seen some of the most stubborn men try and interrupt your plans, intentionally and accidentally. Lord, they never stopped your hand. We see that promise they're going to be moved into a foreign land, and we get to see, Lord, through all of the decades, how you brought that to pass. I pray, God, that it would bring us to a place of contemplation. Lord, what is it that you are doing in our lives? And though, Lord, we can't see it, I pray, God, we would be brought to a place of trusting you. And we love you and we praise you and we pray in your name. Amen.